Hi everyone. So I'm Julia, and many of you know me as your TCM acupuncturist practitioner. So this week we have been talking about trauma. So there's been a couple of posts put on our Facebook page and also on Instagram. So when we're talking about trauma, it's actually quite hard to chat about what is going on in relation to trauma, because trauma is not just physical. Trauma can also be mental. It can be mental, it can be emotional, and it can be physical. I know when we studied traumatology in university that it was more just about injuries and pain. Um, However, when people have gone through trauma, there is always a very high emotional aspect and also a mental aspect to that trauma as well. And sometimes the trauma stays with them throughout their whole entire life, no matter how much you work on yourself or how much you work on, the effects of the trauma or how much physically you actually heal. Sometimes there's always those mental effects and emotional effects that carry on through years after the trauma has actually occurred. Um, so I wanted to just share with you a bit of my story. So when I was 19, I was in my second year of university studying medical science, and we were actually going to a friend's 21st birthday party. So we were all prepared. We had our alcohol, and because we were driving, and we're 19 and on our P plates, we weren't going to drink and drive. So we had our sleeping bags and everything in the back of the car, and we planned to stay the night, safety. However, it was quite a dark night, and it was a new area in Perth, in Joondalup, and we didn't have GPS on our phones back then. It was, using maps, and we didn't have a torch, so we had to use the interior car light. So what actually happened was we missed the the road on which we had to turn. So we decided to continue down the bottom of the road and do a U-turn. So this was a new development. The roads were actually pretty big. So if you put together like two lanes of plenty road, that's actually how wide one lane of this road was. So anyway, the driver, who was my friend at the time, chose to do a U-turn so that we could come down the bottom, do a U-turn, and head back up the hill. However, as we were in the middle of the U-turn, we were actually T-boned by a van that was coming down the hill. Now, the speed limit of the hill was actually 70. With the crash investigators, it was actually figured out that he was doing about 90 kilometres coming down the hill. And at 90 kilometres an hour, he impacted our little Toyota Corolla. And the whole back of the car was literally just smashed to bits. Was quite lucky that one of our other friends wasn't in the back of the car. She was meant to be in the back of the car and she wasn't. However, with the impact of that car hitting the back of the car, the driver's seat actually came out of its bolts and hit me on my right hand side hip. I still have the actual indent today through that soft tissue with that impact. And that impact of the seat actually pushed my spine 5 centimeters to the left. At the same time, her elbow actually came up and connected with my jaw and broke my jaw in 5 places. I also ended up with a broken right-hand side collarbone. So everyone said that I was really, really, really lucky after the car accident to actually be here. One of the saving factors, or one factor that actually helped me physically, was that before the car hit, I heard the screech of tires, and my body actually protected me by making me pass out. So with me being passed out, I was nice and floppy. So as the car hit and me being passed out, my body was loose, which actually limited the amount of physical damage that I had with the impact of elbows and car seats and everything hitting me. However, I did also have seatbelt damage. So I had seatbelt damage right through the left, all through the ribs and across to the hip where the seatbelt had actually locked and I'd been thrown forwards. So what actually happened was I remember waking up on the ground in absolute agony and just screaming. I remember people telling me to calm down because I was in shock, and in my brain I'm like, I know I'm in shock, what's going on? So we were actually, an ambulance was called, and myself and the driver were actually taken to Joondalup Hospital, which is in Perth, and at that stage it was just being built. And I remember being wheeled in and having bits of pipe and you know, pipes and things, everything hanging from the ceiling, and I was just thinking, oh my God, what am I doing here? So we're wheeled into emergency, and Beck was in the cubicle next to me, and I was in one. At this stage, they didn't know what the state of my injuries were, so they ended up having to cut off my pants and my top. And it was one of my favourite tops at the time, this colour, which is one of my favourite colours, and I do mourn the loss of that because I've never found one the same. At the same time, when I was in emergency, I was having trouble breathing, and that was because the jaw was actually broken and was bleeding through the bone. So I was getting a lot of blood coming in through the mouth. So they were having to suction the blood out quite often. They took blood, and I was sent to have x-rays, numerous x-rays. I think about an hour into it, my parents were called. I can't remember much. I can remember instructing one of the doctors on how to put a cannula in. And I was given really heavy painkillers, so morphine and pethidine at the same time. So basically we were at that hospital for a while, and I think we were transferred to Charles Gardner Hospital about 1 a.m. in the morning. And again, we had more x-rays and everything, and then I was put in a bed in the hallway until there was actually a room that was available for me. And again, that day there was more ultrasounds, more x-rays, etc. And at this stage, I still had like blood over my cheek, and my jaw, my face was just absolutely puffed out and mismangled, and I didn't look very good. And yeah, I have to say, one of the most touching things after this was my mum had actually called my friend, and she lived opposite the hospital, and I woke up to see her standing over me at, I think it was 8:30 in the morning, and handing me a teddy bear for comfort. And yeah, that afternoon I ended up going into surgery to have my jaw wired together. So because it was broken in 5 places, I actually have metal plates alongside here, one here and one along here. And so the metal plates were put in to help with the healing, and then my jaw was completely wired together with just a little hole at the front. Now, it took them 4.5 hours to actually wake me up from the anaesthetic, and that took a lot of doing. And once I was actually woken up, they wouldn't let me sleep for the rest of that night because they were worried that if I did go to sleep, I wouldn't actually wake up. So that night I didn't really get much sleep. I think they were waking me up every hour from memory, although it's all a bit of a blur. And so everything was about, okay, well, how's this? How's that going? Meals were delivered, and because my right-hand side collarbone was broken, I couldn't actually fill in any of the meal plans. So they were sending me like solid food, and I just looked at it and really couldn't eat. I was in hospital for 2 days, and then I was discharged and sent home with Mesindol for pain to help. And basically for about 2 weeks afterwards, I was sleeping about 23 hours a day. Just to help heal physically. So although my body was healing physically, mentally and emotionally was a completely different story. So one of my friends who was in my circle of friends, after this car accident, my mum apparently rang her to say, look, she's not feeling the best. Would you mind popping into the hospital and seeing her? And after this friend never spoke to me again. So that's another impact of trauma, is trauma can affect you, but it can affect others around you, and you don't know what the impact of your trauma has on them and how they're going to react either. So this girl in particular, obviously it hit her hard and she didn't know how to deal with it. And her way of coping was not to talk to me ever again. And to this day, I never have spoken to her. I tried numerous times, reached out. Even when Facebook was introduced, I sent her a message just saying, hey, would you mind having a chat? And never heard back. However, it just goes to show the impact that physical trauma has on other people as well, on the ricochet that trauma can have on people. So although I was healing physically, I was black and blue from the right hand shoulder all the way down to my ankle, and I actually stayed black and blue for 9 months. With the spinal, with my spine, it was actually pushed 5 centimeters to the left hand side. So I was actually seeing a chiropractor every day, and I was seeing a chiropractor every day for about I think it was 9 months, and then it was every second day again for like another 9 months. And after 2.5 years, I think we got it down to once a week. And I really have to thank my chiropractor because he got me back to my best new normal. So when you look at my x-rays, though, everyone just goes, oh my God, there's so much physical trauma here. However, I'm in the best possible position that I can be with my spine, and we got it back to the best way that we could after the car accident, given the impact and everything that happened. However, I was determined to go back to uni, and those of you who know me will know that I won't take no for an answer. And I went back to uni. Mum had to come in for some of the lectures to take notes because obviously I couldn't write. However, I did teach myself to write with my left hand side. I made it through that semester. Even doing the exams, I had to sit some of the exams and get someone to write for me. So I did my practical exams by myself with someone writing it. So I actually got through the exams, which was really good. I have to say though, the impact of the accident affected me emotionally and mentally on a much higher scale. So with everything that was going on, like with friendships and me being 19 and trying to heal physically, but not knowing how to deal with the emotions that were going on and what was going on in my head, where I just wanted to forget the car accident and just move forward. However, my friend who was the driver was actually charged with dangerous driving, and this set off a ricochet within the friendship group because they all blamed me. And I was like, no, I'm trying to, help her. I think it was the other driver that was at fault, but because she was doing the U-turn, she was deemed at fault. But that created ricochets throughout our whole entire friendship group, and it basically shattered that whole entire friendship group that we had. And after that, there were different factions of the friendship group, which split everywhere. But I couldn't deal emotionally and mentally with what was going on. For me, the only way that I could deal with things was to shut it off, put it in the back of my mind, and throw myself into university and throw myself into work, because that way I was kept busy. I had something to do. I had something to focus on, because if I actually gave time to focus on what was happening, I actually broke down. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't function. And so the doctors actually sent me to a psychiatrist, and he actually diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. And their way of dealing with that was to put me on antidepressants and keep talking about the car accident. So I found going over and over the car accident and what had happened physically and mentally and emotionally did not help me at all. It's not what I wanted to focus on. I actually wanted to focus on getting better and keep going over the story and, well, what would you do in this situation? What would you have done there? Was not helping me at all. The antibiotics made me feel numb. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't think. My head was foggy and I just felt really heavy. And I'm like, well, this is not working. This is not for me. I'm going to stop them. And I actually took myself off them and stopped going to the psychiatrist, because I'm like, well, it's not helping me, and started looking for other alternatives. So because I was seeing my chiropractor every day, he could actually see that I was struggling with a lot of things. And he actually referred me to a Chinese medicine practitioner. And it was through the Chinese medicine practitioner and going through the initial assessment and him looking at me as a whole person, so through the mind, the spirit, and the body, and combining those together and treating all of that together, and not just, oh, okay, she's got broken bones, let's treat this. Okay, she's got bruises, let's treat this. Okay, so emotionally she's not coping, let's just give her antidepressants. He actually came up with a treatment plan which helped me to mentally and emotionally move forward and start to heal and start to put the pieces of me back together. So physically I was healing, but from his treatments, I started to actually gain strength and start to put me back together. So the other thing that really affected me was I had been on really high dose antibiotics. So originally went in hospital IV antibiotics, and then I was on antibiotics for 9 months after the car accident. So this was because I'd broken my jaws in the 5 places, and they didn't want infection setting into the bone. So they were worried about infection setting into the bone. So for 9 months I was on antibiotics, which completely wiped out my immune system. So basically every 2 or 3 days I was down with a cold, I was down with a virus. My energy levels were not that good. After having my jaw wired together, I dropped 25 kilos. And then when I did start to eat, my body started putting on fat because it was worried that, I hadn't had enough food. So it started storing it as fat. So that was really affecting my self-esteem as well. Plus being sick all the time and trying to do everything. So he actually put me on probiotics and got my digestion and my immune system working again. So this took, I'd say about three years to get me to this point. But I have to say, even today, at the age of 19, I was also told after the car accident that I'd never have children, which is when you're 19, quite something, I couldn't deal with that when I was told with that. I was just like, huh, what? Because the thought of having children hadn't even entered my head. I was 19. Yet to be told at 19 that you're not going to have children and have that taken away from you right then was something that I was like, huh, what? I can't actually deal with that at the moment. So the other thing is with trauma, so physically, yes, I've healed. However, because of that, I do have some arthritis around C6 and C7. And with the birth of my children, I wasn't able to have natural births because of the impact of the car seat through my hip and changing my actual pelvic structure and shape was not conducive to actually giving birth naturally. However, I am so lucky to have my 2 girls, and I thank the universe every day for blessing me with 2 lovely girls. So the impact of the trauma, though, every time I hear that squeal of tires, my body tenses up. I can feel the stress in my body, and I have to force myself to breathe. And breathe through it and just let it go. But my body actually remembers that screech of tires and takes me back to that trauma as well. So with the birth of my first daughter, being wheeled into the emergency surgery, actually brought back everything from the car accident again. And I ended up with postnatal depression as well. So if you've had PTSD, you are more susceptible to postnatal depression, which I didn't know. So that actually also, so again, the trauma actually also impacted coming through that pregnancy and giving birth as well. So people with trauma, although you can see that they're physically healed, they're still going through emotional and mental trauma and sorting through stuff as well. So although you can physically heal from trauma, you're always trying to do healing on yourself. And it's now been over 20 years since I've had the car accident. And just when I think I'm getting on top of things, something will come up and I'm like, oh, I thought I'd address that. Okay, it's coming up. What do I need to look at? Or why is that coming up? and you know, why is it coming up now when I thought I'd actually dealt with that like 10 years ago? And this is why I actually became a Chinese medicine practitioner, because of what that Chinese medicine practitioner was able to do for me when I was 19, and how he helped me to put me back together. Although I was a completely different person after the car accident compared to what I was before the car accident. But I struggled. It took a lot, and I struggled, and I have done a lot of work, but also had a lot of healing. So I've used kinesiology, I've used reflexology, I've used massage, I've used chiropractic, um, and you know, psychology, art therapy. So I also want to talk about, with trauma, find your healthcare group and find what helps you with the trauma to express yourself emotionally and to help reduce that stress and, you know, relieve the anxiety around what can go on in your mind after trauma. So, and the other thing I want to say is, yeah, people can look physically much better. It doesn't mean that they are, and it doesn't mean that they've recovered. And it can cause a lot of issues, and it can cause relationship problems, and it can put a lot of stress on relationship problems. But one lesson I did learn was I learned who I could rely on, and who definitely were my lifelong friends from this. It has definitely made me stronger, but it's also made me more aware of the subtleties of what can occur with trauma. So I tend to attract people that have been through trauma as well, and digestive issues. But when we're talking about trauma, I didn't want to just make it about broken bones and everything, because even with the Australian bushfires, Australia's in trauma. We've lost thousands of wildlife and you know, thousands and thousands of hectares of land. And it's amazing that through these traumatic times, that Australians and everyone from around the world, as humans, we've all come together to help each other. And that is really what needs to happen when other people are affected by trauma, is they need a support system, and they need people to gather around and support them through their journey to making themselves heal and putting themselves back together. I hope you have got a lot out of this, and this is just a bit about my journey. But from all of this, when the time came for me to choose a new career, I actually whittled it down to either chiropractic or Chinese medicine. And when I was reading about Chinese medicine, I actually got butterflies, and that's what made me go and study Chinese medicine. And it is a passion, and I do love it. And it was basically when I was told that I needed a new career, I sat down and I went, well, what has helped me in my life? And when I come back to it, it was chiropractic and Chinese medicine that were the first two modalities that really, really, really impacted me and helped me become the new me, and helped me with the healing physically and emotionally and mentally. I hope you have it, I can't say enjoyed, but thank you all for watching this video and for sharing my journey. I hope you all have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.